The city was quiet that night. Snow drifted down in soft flakes, covering the ground in a thin white layer. The air was sharp and cold, and the streets were almost empty. Streetlights hummed faintly, casting their pale yellow glow across the sidewalks. At the far end of the road stood a small bus stop. The bench there was old, its wooden boards rough and cold. On it a little girl sat curled into herself. Her knees were drawn close to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around them. She wore a thin coat, one that was too small and offered little warmth against the winter air. Her shoes were worn, the soles almost gone. The snow had already soaked into them. She shivered as the icy wind swept across the street. Her eyes were half closed, heavy from exhaustion. Every so often, she looked up the road as if waiting for someone who never came. The night grew colder, and the world around her grew still. She leaned against the corner of the bench, her breathing slow and quiet. Soon her eyelids dropped, and she drifted into sleep under the faint light of the street lamp. No one stopped. No one noticed. Only the falling snow kept her company. A car moved quietly down the road, its tires crunching against the frozen ground. Inside sat a man, tall and serious, his hair touched with gray at the edges. He wore a dark coat that suited his sharp frame. His name was Adrian Cole, a man known in the city as a wealthy businessman. He had spent the evening at a meeting across town. Tired, he leaned back against the leather seat as the driver guided the car through the winter streets. His gaze wandered to the passing lights, the empty sidewalks, the drifting snow. Then, for a brief second, his eyes caught something, a small figure at the bus stop. A child, no older than 8, sitting alone, curled up against the cold. Her coat was too thin, her shoes worn, her body trembling. Adrian straightened in his seat. His eyes narrowed. He turned his head, following the image as the car rolled past. The little girl looked so still, her small body leaning against the bench, her breath misting faintly in the cold air. For a moment, he almost asked the driver to stop. But the car kept moving forward, leaving the sight of the bus stop behind. Adrian's chest tightened as he looked back through the window, the image of the sleeping child staying with him. That night, Adrian could not rest. His house was warm, the fire crackled softly in the living room, and his bedroom was quiet. The bed was large and soft, yet he turned from side to side, unable to settle. His thoughts kept drifting back to the girl at the bus stop. He saw her thin coat. He saw her small hands curled together, trying to hold back the cold. He saw her shoes worn through, soaked with snow. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face. He had built a life of comfort, of security, yet now he felt a heavy ache inside. Why was she there, alone in the freezing night? Where was her family? Did anyone even know she sat out in the cold? The city was filled with numbers, business, meetings, and deals. He was used to solving problems with contracts and money. But this was different. This was not about business. This was about a child. The image refused to leave his mind. Adrian rose from his bed, walked to the wide window, and looked out at the falling snow. The world outside looked peaceful, but he knew one small life out there was suffering, and he had seen it with his own eyes. The morning came gray and heavy. Snow had fallen all night, and the streets were covered in fresh white layers. The air was colder, the wind sharper. At the same bus stop, the girl sat once more. She held a small school bag close to her chest, its straps worn and frayed. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her lips dry, her breath visible in the icy air. She watched the road in silence, waiting, though no bus came. She shifted now and then, trying to warm herself, but her coat was too thin. The snow beneath her shoes had melted into damp patches, soaking the fabric. Yet she did not complain. She simply sat, waiting with a patience far too heavy for her small frame. A few people passed by, bundled in thick coats and scarves. Some glanced at her, most looked away. No one stopped. No one asked. She was part of the background, a quiet figure in the endless cold. The streetlight above her flickered once, its glow faint in the daylight. She pulled her bag tighter against her chest, closing her eyes for a moment as the wind cut across her face. She waited, and the world kept moving without her. Adrian had left early that morning, his thoughts restless. He instructed the driver to take the long route, the one that passed the bus stop. As the car approached, his eyes searched quickly, almost anxiously. Then he saw her. The same small figure, sitting just as before, hugging her school bag, her face pale in the morning light. "Stop the car," Adrian said firmly. The driver pulled over. The cold air rushed in as Adrian opened the door and stepped out. His polished shoes pressed into the snow, his breath forming a cloud in front of him. He walked slowly toward the bench. The little girl looked up. Her eyes were wide, uncertain. She held her bag tighter as though ready to run if needed. Adrian stopped a short distance away, not wanting to frighten her. He looked at her small, trembling form, then lowered his voice. "Hello?" he said gently. "It's very cold." "Why are you here?" The girl did not answer. She only stared, her lips pressed together. Adrian's heart tightened. He had spent years negotiating with men who never flinched, yet in front of this small child, he felt strangely careful, as though every word mattered. The winter air pressed around them, quiet and heavy, and for the first time, the silence broke. The girl's eyes were large and dark, her lashes weighed down by the frost that clung to them. She looked tired, far too tired for someone so young. Her small hands gripped the strap of her bag tightly, as though it was the only thing she owned that mattered. Adrian noticed how her shoulders shook under the thin coat. A strand of hair damp from melting snow stuck to her cheek. Still, she said nothing. She simply stared at him, cautious and guarded. "I won't hurt you," Adrian spoke again, keeping his tone low and steady. "I just want to know if you're all right." The girl lowered her gaze, her lips parting slightly. No words came out, only a soft breath that vanished into the cold air. She looked down at her shoes, their edges torn, the laces frayed. Adrian felt a sharp pull inside. He was used to quick answers, clear responses, yet here he faced silence, silence from a child who seemed to carry too much weight. The wind brushed past them, lifting a swirl of snow across the street. Adrian stepped a little closer, but stopped when her grip on the bag tightened. He nodded gently, not pushing further. He knew trust could not be demanded. It had to be given. Adrian lowered himself, bending one knee slightly so he was not towering above her. The world around them was silent, except for the sound of the wind moving through the frozen air. "I saw you here last night," he said. "It's too cold to be outside so long. Do you live nearby?" The girl blinked, her gaze flickering to his face, then away again. Her lips pressed together as though she weighed whether to answer. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Mama is sick." "I wait here." Her words were thin and fragile, yet they struck deep. Adrian felt the heaviness of them immediately. He studied her face, saw the honesty in her tired eyes, and understood that her story carried more than she revealed. "You wait for someone?" he asked gently. She nodded once. "For Mama to get better, for the bus." The answer was broken, unclear, yet he didn't push. He saw enough. A child waiting in the cold because she had nowhere else to go, because her world had already placed burdens on her shoulders. Adrian's chest tightened. The city's wealth, the tall buildings he owned, all of it felt distant now. In front of him sat a girl who had nothing but patience, silence, and cold. Adrian slowly pulled his gloves from his hands. They were thick, lined with soft wool inside, warm against the winter air. He held them out toward her. "Here," he said softly. "Take these. Your hands must be freezing." The girl looked at the gloves, then back at his face. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if weighing whether this was a trick. She did not reach out. Her small fingers stayed curled against the strap of her bag. Adrian did not push. He kept his arm steady, his expression calm. Snow gathered on the shoulder of his coat as the moment stretched. "You don't have to trust me," he said. "But you'll feel warmer if you wear them." At last, the girl moved. Slowly, carefully, she reached out one hand. Her fingers trembled as they touched the glove. She pulled it back for a moment, then finally took them both. She slipped one on, then the other. Her hands looked even smaller inside the oversized gloves, but her shoulders eased slightly. For the first time, Adrian saw a faint change in her face. Not a smile, but the edge of relief. He felt something shift inside himself as well. A connection, fragile but real, in the cold morning air. Adrian lowered himself onto the bench beside her. The wood was cold even through his thick coat, but he did not move. He sat with his hands folded loosely, his eyes on the empty road ahead. The girl glanced at him from the corner of her eye, as though surprised he chose to sit with her. Her gloved fingers rested on her bag, the leather worn smooth from use. For a while, neither spoke. The silence was not heavy, only quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when two people are unsure but willing to share space. Adrian breathed slowly, his breath rising in the air. He remembered his own childhood, the times he had sat waiting for someone who never came. The feeling of being unseen, forgotten in the noise of the city. It had been years, but the memory lingered. "You're strong," he said at last, his voice calm. "Most children would cry in this cold, but you're still here." The girl did not respond. She only looked down, but her shoulders shifted as if his words had reached her. Adrian turned his head slightly, studying her quiet form. He knew this was not just a chance meeting. Something inside told him their paths had crossed for a reason. The driver stood near the car, watching quietly, his breath visible in the winter air. Adrian rose slowly from the bench and turned to the girl. He extended his hand toward her. His fingers were steady, his expression calm. "Come with me," he said softly. "You shouldn't stay out here." The girl looked at his hand, then up at his face. Her eyes were uncertain, filled with caution. She hugged her bag closer, shaking her head once, almost too quickly. Adrian crouched again, his voice low. "I won't take you far. Just somewhere warm. You can eat. You can rest. That's all." She bit her lip, staring at the snow between her shoes. The silence stretched. Her breathing was uneven, her small chest rising and falling. Adrian kept his hand extended but did not press. "You decide," he added. "But I won't leave you here in the cold." At last the girl lifted her gaze. Something in his steady eyes, something firm yet gentle, made her hesitate less. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she placed her hand into his. Her grip was light, almost weightless, but it was a choice. And in that fragile choice, something new began. The car door closed with a soft thud. Warm air filled the space, carrying the faint scent of leather. The girl sat stiffly in the corner of the back seat, her bag pressed tightly to her chest. Her eyes moved slowly, studying every detail, cautious and alert. Adrian sat across from her, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He did not speak at first. He wanted her to feel the silence was safe, not heavy. The hum of the heater softened the chill, and the girl's shoulders slowly loosened. She looked down at the gloves still covering her hands. Her breath fogged the glass for a moment as she leaned slightly toward the window. Outside, the snow fell faster, covering the city in a thick white blanket. Adrian spoke gently. "My name is Adrian. What's yours?" She hesitated. Then, after a pause, she whispered, "Lila." The name lingered in the air. Simple, fragile, yet it carried weight. Adrian repeated it softly, as though memorizing it. "Lila, you'll be safe now." The girl's eyes flickered toward him, searching his face for truth. He did not look away, and for the first time she did not either. The cafe was quiet, tucked on a corner street with windows fogged by the warmth inside. The smell of coffee and baked bread filled the air. Adrian chose a small table near the window. He ordered 2 hot chocolates, one for himself and one for Lila. When the mugs arrived, steam curled upward, filling the space between them. Lila cupped the mug in both hands. The gloves lay folded on the table. Her small fingers wrapped tightly around the warmth, and she lifted it slowly to her lips. The first sip brought a faint change in her face, a relief so subtle it almost passed unnoticed. Adrian watched quietly. He didn't press her with questions. He let her sip, let the warmth settle into her. After a moment, she spoke, her voice soft. "Mama can't work. She's sick. We don't have money." Her eyes lowered, fixed on the swirl of steam. Adrian listened, his chest heavy. "Where is she now?" he asked carefully. "At home. I wait for her at the bus stop every day. She says one day, it will come." Her words trailed off, fragile and uncertain. Adrian's hand tightened around his mug. He understood now. The bus was not a bus at all. It was hope, wrapped in the form of waiting. Later that day, Adrian followed Lila to where she lived. The streets narrowed, the houses closer together, their walls weathered by time. She led him to a small apartment building, its paint chipped, its entrance buried under snow. Adrian paused, studying it. The windows were dim, some cracked, others covered with thin curtains. The place spoke of struggle, of nights without heat, of silence filled with worry. Lila pushed the door open with effort, her small body straining against the weight. Inside, the stairwell was dark and cold. She climbed quickly, her small feet echoing against the wooden steps. Adrian followed, his tall frame filling the narrow space. At the top, she stopped at a door with peeling paint. She placed her hand on the knob, turning it slowly. "Mama's inside," she whispered. The door creaked as it opened. The air inside was still, heavy with the scent of medicine and dampness. Adrian stepped in behind her, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. On the bed lay a woman, thin and pale, her breathing shallow but steady. Her eyes fluttered open as the door closed. And for the first time, Adrian understood the weight this child carried every day. The room was small, with bare walls and little furniture. A single lamp cast a weak glow, fighting against the shadows. Lila rushed to her mother's side, taking her frail hand. "Mama," she whispered, "I brought someone." The woman's eyes, tired and weak, turned toward Adrian. She tried to sit up but lacked the strength. Adrian stepped closer, his face steady, his voice calm. "You've done your best," he said gently. "But you shouldn't have to face this alone." The woman's lips trembled. She wanted to speak, but the effort cost her. Instead, she looked at Lila, then back at Adrian, as if searching his intent. Adrian's gaze held firm. "I'll help. Both of you. No more waiting in the cold. No more fear of tomorrow." Lila leaned against her mother, her small hand resting on hers. The woman's eyes glistened, a faint tear slipping down her cheek. She whispered something too soft to catch, but Adrian understood the meaning. In that dim room, surrounded by silence and shadows, a fragile hope began to form. A hope no longer tied to a bus that never came, but to a promise spoken with steady certainty. Weeks passed. The cold remained, but life changed. Lila no longer sat waiting at the bus stop. Instead, she wore a thick coat and scarf, her steps quick and light as she ran across the snowy park. Her laughter carried through the crisp air, a sound bright enough to warm even the coldest day. On a bench nearby, Adrian sat beside her mother. She looked stronger now, her cheeks no longer pale, her body supported by care and treatment. She leaned back, breathing deeper, her eyes following her daughter's every movement. Adrian watched too, his lips curved in a faint, rare smile. He had built towers of glass and steel, but this moment felt like something greater. Not wealth, not success. Simply the sight of a child no longer waiting, no longer cold, no longer alone. Lila stopped for a moment, waving at them with her gloved hand. "Mama, Adrian, look at me!" she called. They both lifted their hands, returning her wave. The snow sparkled in the sunlight, the park filled with quiet life. For the first time in a long time, tomorrow did not feel uncertain. The bus had never come. But something else had, a choice, a hand offered in the cold. And from it, a new beginning.